Downstairs you had asked, we were talking about rosaries, and I told you I still have mine. So I have a really good friend. His name's Dom Razzo, and he's a former SEAL, SEAL Team 6 guy, and has been a good friend to me and a spiritual mentor of mine, and a very devout Catholic. And so I bring this with me everywhere I go.
Good.
To protect me. And
Good.
And every time, and then I give them away, and then I have to call Dom and tell him send me another one. But this is a Warrior's Rosary.
Okay.
And I would love for you to have that.
Thank you, buddy.
You're welcome.
Now, I gave you a rosary today.
You did.
So you have one back. Like mine, the one I gave you is from this place called Medjugorje in Bosnia Herzegovina. And that rosary was in the room during the apparition of Our Lady to one of the visionaries. And at the end of the apparition, she blessed all of the sacramentals in the room. So the rosary that I gave for you and your wife have both been blessed, not just by me with the priestly blessing, but by the Mother of God herself. Bless those rosaries. Don't give those away.
I won't. Thank you very much. I'll carry that with me everywhere.
Good.
Thank you. All right, Father. So let's get to your life story. Where did you grow up?
Long Island, New York, Williston Park. It's about 18 miles east of Manhattan.
Brothers, sisters?
I'm the oldest of four. Then 2 years after me is my sister, and then 2 years after her is my middle brother, Jimmy, and then my little brother, Brian. It was almost 10 years after me.
Did you grow up in a devout Catholic family?
Yes. There really was no devout Catholic in 1965 because Vatican II did such a number on removing the awe and the splendor of God from the Mass, sort of. And I don't know they did it on purpose, but it definitely was a byproduct where there's a lot of felt and a lot of Jesus loves me, and really no firm catechesis in what actually is our role as Catholics, as Christians baptized, and what does God want from us, and what does he expect from us, and it was just love God and do whatever you want, was kind of the message. So, but my parents were good Catholics. We went to Mass every Sunday. They prayed the rosary. They were. I remember the first time I recognized my dad kneeling at Mass. Like, it's a powerful image to see your father kneeling when he was a New York City fire chief, a big tough guy. So, to see him kneel, it made an impression on me.
Has the church come back around?
In many ways, yes.
Okay.
Pope Benedict opened the door to allow the sacrifice of the Mass that took place up to Vatican II, which is the extraordinary form they call it now, which is in Latin, where the priest says this back to the people, but it brings forth a greater reverence in the Mass for a number of reasons, but we don't need to go into that. But also, a lot of the priests who are leaning towards the more liberal side of the spectrum and who were lobbying for women priests, who were lobbying for married priests, who were lobbying for all these things, gay marriage, they're pretty much run their cycle and they're about over. And the new priests, the young guys, are going back to the traditional principles of the faith. And it's the orthodoxy that never left, but it was really put under the carpet and hidden away for about 40, 50 years.
Interesting. So was that taught and now it's expiring, or is it just how things
The liberal principles?
Yes.
The church is definitive on its teaching, and it always has been. There can only be men priests because they follow what Jesus did. He chose 12 men. There were priestesses in other pagan religions at that time, so it wasn't off the table. He could have done that. His mother is the holiest person that was ever created, who's not divine. She would have been the best priest if you were going to allow anybody, because she's perfect. I mean, she had no sin in her. But he chose, no, these will be these 12. So that's never going to change. Can priests be married? They sure can. We know Peter had a wife. He had a mother-in-law, so he had to have a wife. And we've had married priests for, probably 4 or 5 centuries in the church. But after a while, it became an issue for raising families. How do you raise a family if you're just going to keep picking up people and moving them, and they don't own the land? The church owns the land, and how do we distribute the property? And all, it became a big headache. And for many other reasons, the church just said, we want the priest to be focused on his flock specifically, and that's why we're going to impose on him this promise of celibacy.
Well, is there any friction within the church on that, especially in the priesthood?
I don't see it. I mean, so in the church, there's the God-imposed rules or laws, and then there's man-imposed, okay? The man-imposed ones can be changed, and that's not a problem. The ones that God set forth, we are untouchable. We can't change those things. It was through the popes where they decided to embrace celibacy rather than marriage. So that can be changed back with no problem. Pope has the authority to do that. And in fact, when we have other priests coming in from other religions, there's a guy named Dwight Longnecker. Father Longnecker was, I think, Episcopalian, and he had a family, but he realized, I want to be part of the Catholic faith. I think this is where the truth resides the most. When we took him into the church, the Holy See declared that he would be ordained a priest even though he already has a wife and kids. And he'd have to make special provisions to provide for them, but that's fine. Because Peter, we have examples throughout history where it happened. So that can be changed. But you can't change the things that God set forth that cannot be changed.
Okay. Makes sense.
Like the fasting before Mass. It used to be Vatican II, from midnight till you went to Mass, no food, just water. And then the church said, there's people passing out in Masses a lot. Maybe we should make a 1-hour fast before, and now that's what it is.
Okay.
Because that was a man-made thing.
Gotcha. Back to childhood.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff were you into as a kid?
Because I was the firstborn and didn't know anything, I was pretty naive about everything. Rode my bike, played kickball, baseball, I swam on the swim team, played football when I pee-wee football then in high school. Mostly just sports, and we went outside all day. When it was summer, you just left for the whole day, you came back for dinner. And you prayed with all the kids on your block. It was just different. It was completely different than it is now.
Were you interested in Catholicism as a child, or was it more of a chore?
It was never a chore. I went to church with my family, and we could actually walk to church. We were that close to the church, a few blocks. But as fate would have it, I was molested by a priest when I was 11, and that changed my trajectory for a long time. I just said, I'm never going back to that place, to a church, and I kind of stuck to it. And I kept it hidden until I was in college, and then I told my parents what had happened, and then it started to make sense because I changed dramatically, as you can imagine your personality would when it's soul-crushing to be sexually abused by anybody, but when it's a representative of God's church, it just spins way out of control. The devil comes right in and starts telling you God hates you, he never cared about you, your parents hate you. It was every possible lie, and you don't know what to believe. So I kind of spun out of control. I'm pretty headstrong and have a strong will, and I just decided no one's going to hurt me like that again. Joined the football team, lifted a ton of weights for a long time to become as big as I could, and then thinking that would be, I'll be strong enough where I can defend. And once you become a man, you kind of don't have to worry about those sort of things. But
can we rewind?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
This priest claimed he was, kind of doing spiritual retreats for middle school guys. And with 3 of us, he took on a retreat overnight. We get there, he's got beer. And, we weren't even into beer. It's like we're at an age where it's like, what are you doing? And that night he sexually assaulted me. But obviously I woke up to him on top of me, and, it was not pleasant.
And you held that in all the way until college?
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Did you continue to Did you have to continue to go to that same church?
No, I didn't go. I never went. I stopped. And I would just tell my parents, I'm walking to church, I'm going to this mass, bye. And then I would go hang out at the parking lot or the playground. And I did this, I went to Catholic education my whole life, grammar school, high school, college was even Catholic, but I did not go to church. I didn't participate in any of the sacraments.
What did that, how did you overcome that there's so many kids out there, even just on this show. I would say 50% of the guests or more have been through some type of sexual trauma as a child. And so for all the kids that are listening or who are going to go through that, who are going through it, who have been through it, how did you get over that?
I'm not the best example because what I did is not the right way to go. I just shut down God and his church. I kind of went my own way. I rebelled. I became a really bad kid. My parents didn't know what was going on, but they knew something is wrong. But back then, nobody even dreamed this was a possibility. We're talking the 70s. So they just kept grounding me because I was always out partying and drinking and having fun with the crazy kids. And, college was my ticket out of there, where I just get away from this whole thing. But that's where I finally went into it and realized this has to be dealt with. You can't just go through life like this. And I kind of just looked at it objectively, like, I guess bad things happen to people who don't deserve them. It happens all the time. I guess I'm a victim of that, but I'm not going to let that, be the guiding force in my life. Like, it's an event, but it doesn't have to be the force that's going to shape and mold you. So, like, live your life already. But I was living my life without God, and that's the first mistake. Don't throw God out when something bad happens. It's not his fault. You can't blame God for his cheap labor. So I would say if you're a kid and something bad has happened to you, tell your parents, regardless of how embarrassing it was or how shameful it was or whatever. They got to get involved, because the only way you're going to get quick help is when they know something has happened. Now, if your parent is the part of the problem, if they're abusing you, then you have to get help from somebody else. Go to a teacher.
How do you feel that the Catholic Church deals with this? It has been a reoccurring problem within the church.
Again, I'm not probably the most informed, but probably more than the lay people. I think a lot of good provisions have been put into place to stop this. But my own case, I was one of 17 from the same priest.
One of 17.
So that could have been prevented long ago, before I was even, on the horizon there. The bishops kept moving him, and that's what happens, So I blame the bishops. They could have prevented this. And I'm not going to make any excuse from it at all, because, like, one kid is enough to say, no, we're not going to let that happen again. But right here in Franklin, there was just a priest removed a few months ago. So it's still not completely over.
Yeah.
And you got to go back to the seminaries and say, you got to have better detection systems when somebody is open to this sort of sexual behavior. There has to be a way to screen it. There has to be. When I first came back to the faith, I found a priest in New York who I really liked. He was a Franciscan friar, the Renewal, Father Benedict Rochelle. He also was a psychiatrist. And he told me he'd interviewed probably 1,000 priests who did these things to kids, usually in prison. And what he noticed with all of them is they had stopped praying. He would just say, when did you stop praying at your office, the breviary? It's the one prayer we have to pray every day. We don't have to say Mass every day, but we have to pray this set of prayers. It's the only promise we take, is to do that in obedience to our bishop. And they would all say, how did you know? And he said, because I've been interviewing you guys for years now, and it's the common denominator. Now, that doesn't take away the problem. If somebody has an inherent problem that they're attracted to children, even praying is not going to be enough, I don't think. But you can see that was a factor. They gave up praying, and they basically threw in the towel, and they gave in to the desires. But there has to be a model that you can be screening in seminary to figure out. I mean, I have to believe they know they have this desire. We know what we want. We know what attracts us, what makes us, get aroused. And if that's you, for the sake of the kingdom of God and for your own soul, admit it and get out of there and get help. Like, that has to be an option that they give on day one. If this is something you're attracted to, we want to help you, but you cannot be ordained.
Do you think this was actually a Patreon question? I didn't want to kick the interview off that heavy. But do you think that if they were allowed to marry, do you think that do you think this would solve a greater portion of the problem?
No.
No.
They're not interested with sex with women. Clearly. I mean, that's not what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And no one's going to put themselves into a marriage. And look at the poor woman in a marriage that's a ruse, that's just a shield. The woman's going to know pretty quickly, he's not interested in me. He never wants to sleep with me. So, like, what is he looking for then? That's what they were looking for.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I'm sorry that happened.
It's kind of an interesting path, because when I finally did get the full healing from this thing, and that came when I got into religious life, and the Lord uses me to bring healing to others. When I first heard God calling me to be a priest, my first reaction was, why would you ask me to do that?
Where were you when you heard this?
Well, the first time somebody said, I think you're a vocation to be a priest, I was in Medjugorje. I had just done my 22-year confession with a priest. And he absolved me, and I felt amazing. And then he says, I think you have a vocation to be a priest. And I was like, what? Did you not just listen to that confession? Clearly, I'm not called to be a priest. It was a wild days at Wall Street. And he's like, no, all things are possible with God. But I was just like, no, the priest is a little bit Looney Tunes. But when I started, I came back to New York City, I had to get my life in order, because, the conversion's one thing, but now you have to implement it. Part of that was I had to get rid of the bad influences in my life. I had a lot of bad friends who were not good influences, big with the cocaine, big with the partying. I had to go. And I joined the Wall Street Young Catholics Association to make new friends with guys that were trying to live virtuous lives. Big 180, just by putting the right people around you. They lift you up.
So hold on. So how crazy did it get on Wall Street with you?
The life is crazy. I'm just going to leave it at that, because I don't want to scandalize the faithful. But, you're living in the biggest city in the world with everything available, and you're making a ton of money. You can fill in the blanks. And then I started working for a public relations firm where I was working with both New York corporations, big ones, Citicorp, Chase, Pfizer, but also the celebrity route. So Jennifer Lopez was a client, Tommy Hilfiger, Rolling Stone magazine's photographer Mark Seliger, and he was introducing me to people like Brad Pitt and Jerry Seinfeld at his parties. And there's just, there's no end to the craziness that goes on in a lot of these circles, okay? I'm not saying any of these people were doing that, but the lifestyle is there if you want it. So, yeah, I had to make big decisions on reading all that stuff out and just working towards a virtuous life, which would bring forth the peace that I was really looking for. It's just peace. A peace where I just felt good about my life, and I wasn't always anxious or angry or just full of all these negative emotions. So here I am. The Lord, when he asked me, he said, listen, I'm going to use you to bring healing and reparation to people who've been hurt. I was like, oh, well, that's all right. That's kind of an interesting twist. Now, today, looking back, I could say, well, that should be every priest. It shouldn't just be a special case, because you got abused. But he was going into that deeper for the abused victims too. And I would find myself in the most ridiculous positions. I speaking at a prison to, 500 murderers and rapists who, by the way, probably 80% of them were sexually abused as kids, and they went into drugs, and then they went into getting the money for those drugs and got involved in all sorts of bad things, where I'm preaching to them my story and telling them that God has a plan for their life too. And I'm watching these big, huge skinhead murderers, and there's just tears coming down because they've never heard this. No one's ever told them that, one, God loves them, that two, he has a plan to rescue them and get them free again, and that he's never stopped loving them. Like, they've never heard this. Like, whoa, okay. So this is going on for quite a bit of time. I'm now older. I'm sitting in the chapel one day praying, and the Lord says to me, "Can I ask you a question?" And I'm like, "Okay, but you've never asked me if you want to ask me a question before. What is this about?" And if you want to ask a question, you just ask it. He goes, "I want you to remember this. I don't want you to ever forget it. So if I could take you back to being 10 years old before you were abused and let you live your life going forward that way, knowing what you know now, and knowing that I've healed you completely, and knowing how much I've used you already to help people, you're not even ordained, would you change your life?" And I had to think about it. And I was like, no, I'm good. Because I don't have any of the baggage. I don't have any of the pain. But I'm seeing how you're using me to help other people. And if this is just the tip of the iceberg, then let's go forward. But it was such an amazing moment where you realize he really can bring goodness out of anything if you let him, if you're willing to be healed and do the work and go forward.